one lesson we've learned is nature can be resilient. And of course, the millenary practices that have been used by many of the indigenous communities in the Amazon are all about using some of the land and letting it return back, not only for fertility, but for other creatures in this area. I mentioned the example before of some of the marine communities and coastal communities in Fiji and others. So I think there's a lot of good examples there. So absolutely, this is about looking at it. I think one thing we haven't discussed is when we think about restoration, I fully support the term in its true sense, restoring. Mm-hmm. And so many people think that restoring is just planting trees. Let us not ignore the power of natural regeneration. And I think as long as we have enough of these places left and seed banks and nearby forests and oceans and others, restoration can actually be a very effective way of bringing things back. I think David made the point of New England being a lot of it being natural regeneration, but there are things we can do to accelerate it. The challenge, of course, is that we do need to look at all of these things, protected areas, restoration, food systems, in view of climate change. I think that is something that's changing very fast. And of course, many of these areas are not going to be effective for that. And we're going to not only the question that pops up is what's the baseline we're trying to go back toward or restore toward? Because it's not going to be easy to go back to some of these old ecosystems. Many of them are not going to work. So I think it's going to require some adaptation and some new mechanisms, potentially including some new species that are going to potentially be part of the solution. Sure. So this is a very important area, but I do love the term rewilding. I think it's an important way of bringing nature back and giving it space. And I think if there's one lesson we've learned is if the conditions are right, it will come back.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I quickly want
to. Kiani?
Sorry. I think this is the question that Natalie Adams had posed in the chat. And so I just briefly wanted to touch on this, especially because they had brought up specifically in Massachusetts. And I'm currently working on a project where I'm mentoring 4 high school students at Cambridge Latin High School, and they're creating a community garden and prioritizing planting indigenous species to hopefully bring in native insects as well, specifically bees and beetles and wasps. And so I think if you want to join the happy hour, I'm happy to chat about this more in depth, but there's a practice called the Three Sisters method, which is called a bunch of different things amongst different tribes, but that's what it's called here, the Ponkanog tribe. And they basically plant 3 different native species together. So we have corn, squash, and beans all planted together. And it's supposed to, hopefully, we'll see, like once we get this garden up and running, if it increases the amount of wildlife that is attracted to the area. So